Oh, welcome in to the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And man, do we got a show lined up for you. We have got my buddy, Steven Lassan, in person, in studio. Steven and I went about an hour and a half breaking down the Athlon Sports Preview Magazine's predictions on the SEC. We went so long that we're going to span it into 2 episodes. And I think you guys are really going to get a lot out of this conversation. Steven is the first time he's ever done a in-studio appearance like this. We both had the magazine, the Athlon Sports Magazine, in our hands. And I just thought we'd cover it, as you're sitting there looking at your Athlon, page by page, going across the SEC. Like I said, he is instrumental in putting that thing together. So to be able to pick his brain while sitting there reading the Athlon, going page by page, I just thought it would make for a fantastic interview, and it exceeded all my expectations. So again, we're going to hit the SEC East heavy on this episode. Tomorrow's show, we're going to do the SEC West. Same deal. We're just going to span this 2 episodes. It was that good content. But let's kick it over to our interview with Steven Lassan of Athlon Sports.
Don't seem too stiff.
No, it's all good, brother. I just appreciate you coming through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, of course, hey, we're here. Steven Athlon.
Pretty much the way it is.
Steven Lassan, Athlon Sports, senior editor is your title. One of the men that makes the Athlon magazine my go-to preseason college football magazine. I can't thank you enough, Steven, for, I believe you were telling me this is your first in-person interview ever.
It is. I apologize for all the subscribers you might lose after the show. But it's good to be here, man. You and I have talked for years about the SEC on your podcast, and it's a pleasure to be here talking to you and getting ready to preview the season. The magazine's out, so hey, talking season is here. It's a good time.
Before we get into the SEC, which is, of course, why you're here to talk SEC football, can you tell the audience, I love what you're doing on your YouTube channel. How can they find you on there and the unique content, what you're trying to do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to everything we're doing at Athlon Sports with the Cover 2 podcast, I have my own YouTube channel. It's Steven L. CFB on YouTube right now. You have to search for it. I need a few more subscribers to get to that mark. But yeah, just trying to give more college football content. We can only cover so much on the website and the magazine, on the podcast. So trying to just go a little deeper on certain subjects, some team previews, got a lot of other things coming this offseason. So Steven L. CFB on YouTube, but appreciate anybody checking it out.
You're doing a great job with that. You just launched it recently, so you've only got a handful of videos up, but you can tell the effort you put into the website, the magazine, it's there on your YouTube channel, so I think you're off to a great start.
I try to go in depth. I think there's never when you write a story or you do a podcast or something, I think going in depth is one of my favorite things about college football is that we can talk surface level that Georgia and Alabama are going to be good, but the rest of college football, and I think this is a broader point, is there's so much attention on 1 through 4, but we miss all the things that happen 5 through 60 in the rest of college football, the middle of the East, and the SEC, Pac-12, Big 12. So my goal with all this is to be in depth and encompassing and cover all 131 teams and try to cover some teams maybe that don't get enough attention as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of that, Steven, this has got to be the only opportunity someone has got to sit down with someone that's put together the Athlon Sports Magazine in person. We both are sitting here looking at the magazine. We got it handy-dandy right here. So I just thought we'd kind of basically go team by team as laid out in the magazine to talk about these teams. So let's start with the SEC East. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Yeah, let's start there.
So Florida Gators, they open the Athlon magazine, of course, being out of the East. And Billy Napier, first year. This is a very difficult team to read with the coaching turnover, the player turnover. I think early on the recruiting, some fans are right now, we're recording in June.
The honeymoon period is still there, yeah.
Right. So they did well to end recruiting. Maybe we'll see some of those young players on the field. I know we're going to see a bunch of the transfers.
Absolutely.
So these are tough things to kind of gauge in a year one. But let me ask you this, because I've been pumping up Anthony Richardson. I know you're a fan too.
Definitely.
But let's say, I don't want to put too much expectations on the guy, but he, in my mind, could be we see guys like Johnny Manziel, Marcus Mariota, Cam Newton that just kind of, really take that big leap.
And maybe even like a KJ Jefferson leap
Perfect.
from last season. He's that type of player. I think to start there, Billy Napier is I think is a great hire for Florida, and we've seen this so far with what he's done on recruiting. We'll see that, and he's hired 500 assistants to do in the off-field role, but that's the Georgia-Alabama approach, and it's not going to be an overnight turnaround for Napier of Florida, but Richardson is one of those players that you could see. We haven't projected, outside the top 25 in the magazine, but if he has the type of season that, the potential that he showed in a limited time last year, I think averaged over 8 yards a play. The big plays were there. Mm-hmm. You just want to see the more consistency from game to game, pass to pass consistency, and then the turnovers that we saw out of Florida's passing game last season. So I think there's a lot of untapped potential, and we saw this with Napier at Louisiana. The quarterback there, a lot of quarterback rollouts. They did a lot of things to make easy reads for the quarterback. It's very friendly for this type of player, for Anthony Richardson, his mobility and things. So I think this offense will fit him well. I also think Napier, one thing to watch that he did at Louisiana, they played a lot of close games. Mm-hmm. So don't be surprised if that team plays close games, and Richardson could be one of the differences in getting over the hump in some of them.
Right, because just the way the roster lays out, it kind of looks like they're going to go ground and pound, which
that was their style at Louisiana.
They're going to try to help that defense, and then to your point, in these close games, you need a marquee playmaker. That's going to be the difference when they play Kentucky, Tennessee. Many of these teams they're matching up with South Carolina in the East. If he's the difference, that's the difference between a winning and losing a game. And let me ask you right out the gate, Utah, because I bet when Florida fans scheduled that, they didn't think, well, we're going to get a top 10 Utah coming into town. There's no way for you to answer this, but, how Florida will look in that game. But maybe you can provide some insight for the Florida fans into what type of team is rolling into town in the opener with Utah.
Top 10 good. Won the Pac-12 last year, just dominated Oregon in that Pac-12 championship game. They almost won the Rose Bowl. They bring back pretty much everybody off that team. Devin Lloyd was a linebacker, got drafted. They will miss him. Cam Rising is back at quarterback. One thing about Utah is they are always well coached, especially along the line of scrimmage. And even though they have some turnover there, we think they're going to be fine. I think they're the team to beat in the Pac-12 this year. And but one thing for Florida fans that you're catching them in the first game of the year. Mm-hmm. You have the element of surprise on Florida's behalf because we don't really know what this team is going to look like, to your point. I think when you study Florida and maybe some of the things that I'm interested in too, just, the all-conference team for us at Athlon Sports isn't necessarily the end-all be-all when it comes to talent in the SEC, but you see the question marks at receiver for Florida, some of the offensive line and defensive line. That's where Utah can challenge them, especially right along the line of scrimmage. So first game works in Florida's favor, but this is a very good Utah team that's coming to Gainesville.
And if I'm a Gator fan, I got to be hoping it's hot, it's muggy, it's humid. Yep. Utah ain't going to be handling that too well. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm not trying to, put water out on enthusiasm, but let's just say that Utah does win that football game. If you're a Florida fan, you're not freaking out based on the caliber of Utah, right?
Not at all. This is a Utah team that can make the college football playoff. There's no shame at all if you're Florida in losing this game, especially with Kentucky coming up the next week. I mean,
that's the one I really wanted to ask you about.
Yeah. Sorry to go over here, but yeah, I mean, for Florida, to me, this is not a team that should be shooting for the SEC East title. It's a team that it's a foundation year, and we'll see where Napier continues to stack things going forward. This first game will give them a good test, especially Kentucky and then Tennessee after that. So I think if you're Florida, it's one of those measuring stick opportunities just to see where you are against a top 10 team.
And so that week 2 matchup, so pivotal with, everybody and their mother at this point, unless you're a diehard Gator, they're circling that game and saying, well, I'd like Kentucky to go down there. I mean, imagine a world where we're picking Kentucky to win in Gainesville. I think Billy Napier and company, they're going to be using that all off season. And I think, if you just, did a blind test, roster A, roster B, I think most people are going to pick Florida's roster over Kentucky. Now, of course, they got continuity in Lexington and everything they got going for them. I'm not trying to downgrade them, but is it wild to think that, there's people, Athlon included, and I know it's not just one game you're going off of here, but you do got Kentucky higher than Florida in your preseason picks. I feel like that's motivation for the Gators to kind of come out here and set the tone earlier. And there's a reason Dan Mullen. There's many reasons Dan Mullen's not there anymore, but big reason he lost to Kentucky twice, and that showing last year, that was basically the beginning of the end. So I think this Florida team's going to be really motivated to come out and kick some ass week 2. What's your thoughts on that?
Totally agree with you. I think it's only week 2, but it's also pretty pivotal for the SEC East. I mean, we'll get a pretty good idea of where Florida is after playing Utah and Kentucky. And then for Kentucky, I like this Kentucky team, and I know we'll get to them. But, there are some questions with this team. So if you're Florida, you start out 2-0 and you pick off Utah, you pick off Kentucky, and all of a sudden that some of these concerns that we had come into the season, like how does the offensive and defensive lines look, the playmakers at receiver and running back, how do all those look? So I think if nothing else, it's a huge, measuring stick opportunity in both those games. But we're going to learn a lot about personnel, and we always see, surprises. Our SEC East standings, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Florida are close together. It wouldn't surprise me if Florida finished second. I think it'd probably be a 5-3, 4-4 type situation. So that second game against Kentucky is going to tell us a lot about the East, I think.
And one other game I really want to, because this is one of my talking points, Stephen, but we got at LSU, middle of the season, October 16th. And I think, I think this is just something that all people like you and I and the fans, you look at the schedule and you're like, oh, it's at LSU. Probably going to lean the Tigers on that one. But the way I look at it, it's no secret. Billy Napier, he wanted that job. And they didn't even really consider him for reasons I can't even get a straight answer out of anybody. So I think this game's a lot more personal to Billy Napier and the Florida Gators. And, hey, I think Brian Kelly's a hell of a coach. But, there's a learning curve in the SEC. And I think he's going to learn real quick in the SEC. Florida, even though this game may be going away when we get rid of divisions, this is a heated rivalry. And I think there's an outstanding chance that Florida wins that football game against LSU this year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's a lot of toss-up swing games in the middle of the SEC this year. Right. I think it's no secret Georgia and Alabama and Texas A&M are probably going to be everybody's top 3. But it's that middle of the SEC once you get into the Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Ole Miss, Arkansas debate. So these type of games, I think, will not only give us some clarity as to who's going to be, kind of emerging out of that pack, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the coaching search at LSU, there's no secret that Scott Woodward, likes to go, big game fishing and go out there with big names. So I think that certainly played into it. But Napier's a heck of a hire for Florida. I think when you look at the foundation of what he's done so far, like that's the type of approach, especially in recruiting, staff building, that you need to keep up with the Alabama and Georgia. And I think he's off to a good start. And kind of like we've talked about, it's a foundation year. So those type of games, you can pick some of those Kentucky and LSU off. All of a sudden, we haven't projected at 7-5, but 8-4 wouldn't surprise me at all. And finishing like in that back half of the top 25. And
I just realized I screwed up. I screw up about a dozen times on a podcast. I was looking at 2021. They host LSU, so
at Texas A&M though.
Right. Well, that's true, but that's a personal one too because of the COVID year. You know what?
Yeah.
So that should be a hell of a game. But moving on to Georgia, the reigning national champions, of course. Not a lot of questions. I mean,
what do you say about Georgia?
They've arguably got the best roster, maybe this side of Alabama in the country. I mean, I don't know where you're at with Ohio State, but, right there, they look like everybody is going to be picking them to win the SEC East, and for good reason. My only question really is, do they have that drive? Do they have that hunger? I mean, I think Kirby's saying all the right things, and people point at the fact that he was at Alabama and they were able to do it, but that means nothing to me because these players have not been where they're at right now at the top of the mountain and everybody telling them how great they are. They've been getting pats on the back for months and months and months. So how hard are they working behind the scenes? We're going to find out real quick with this game. Oregon, what can you tell us about Oregon? And of course, we know Dan Lanning We know Bo Nix, who I don't think he's been named starter yet, but it's
most
assumed,
likely the starter
right.
for
So,
Oregon, yeah.
I don't want to say trap game right out the gate, but what can you tell Georgia fans about Oregon in this opener they got?
Yeah, I think when we did our Pac-12 predictions, they were the clear favorite in the North, and I think that holds true. The Pac-12 changed its conference championship game rules, so Oregon may not be the second best team anymore in the Pac-12. It could be USC, but that kind of gives you an idea. They're in that top 10 to 15 of college football. A team that is strong along the line of offensive line of scrimmage. They have Bo Nix, as you mentioned. There's familiarity with Dan Lanning, young skill talent on the outside of receiver, and some good running backs as well. The defense was not as good last year. They got pushed around against Utah, so that will be something to watch. I think in that game is how does Oregon's offensive line handle that defensive front of Georgia, and then on the flip side of things, Georgia's offensive line should be very good this year, and so they should be able to kind of impose their will on the Ducks' defensive front. There's no more Kayvon Thibodeau either, who went to the NFL draft. So this is a very good Oregon team, but I also think when you look at the top of college football, there's a clear elite class of Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State. Oregon's in that second tier.
Well, looking at Georgia's schedule, is there one game in the SEC that looks like maybe there's an upset possibility? I mean, I've already gone on record at South Carolina, so I bet Kirby's got that in the locker room, so they're going to probably beat the hell out of the Gamecocks. I'm just waiting for, what's his name, Old Takes Exposed.
Yeah, to come get us for later. Yeah.
He's going to have a good time that Saturday, but any other teams outside of the trip to Columbia that you see could give Georgia the most issue?
I think looking later in the season at Mississippi State, at Kentucky, I will just be honest, I don't see any team here that will be, in spread-wise, it'll be within 10 points of Georgia. It could be even a little bit higher. This team, I know that they only returned 10 starters. They lost a lot on defense. I'm not worried at all. I think they've reached that Alabama point to where they're just cycling through the next wave. I mean, Georgia fans know how good Jalen Carter is, Nolan Smith, Robert Beal, Keely Ringo. The rest of the nation's about to find out, and their offense could be even better this year. I mean, certainly there's some faces to replace at running back. We know that Georgia finds running backs. They're Brock Bowers, Eric Gilbert, Washington at tight end. I mean, they're loaded at the skill talent. So I think this Georgia team, we've got them at 12-0 in the regular season. It's hard for me to find a loss. The only caveat in college football is that it is really hard to go unbeaten. As you were alluding to, it's hard to repeat. I mean, go back to the BCS era, and Alabama's the only team one time to go back-to-back. So Georgia's fighting history, and they're also fighting some personnel turnover, but I'm not really that worried about the personnel turnover.
Now, let me ask you one thing, though, Stephen, because we got here, as pointed out by Athlon, Georgia faced an average distance of 5.86 yards to go, second shortest in all of college football, but converted only 44%, and we're talking third downs, which is 41st nationally. Now, they had an all-time great defense, and as also the magazine, of course, points out, it's not going to be as good. I mean, it would be impossible to be that good. Now, they could still be the best in the SEC.
I was going to say,
you know what I mean?
They gave up 10 points a game last year. That's really, really elite. They could be just 15 this year. That's still first in the SEC.
Exactly. But there may come a time where Stetson Bennett, I mean, when I look at that third down number, that to me says Stetson at times, that guy gets too much heat he just won a national championship. I'm not trying to bury him. I'm not saying when's he going to get benched like I was saying all last season.
Right.
He's earned that starting role, but is that concerning at all that maybe it is Mississippi State, maybe it is at Kentucky, maybe it is South Carolina, where he's got to convert on third down, particularly early in the season with that defense. I don't want to say they get in a shootout, but if they got to get to 28, 30 points to win a game, what's your confidence level that Stetson will deliver?
I think pretty high. I think we saw this last year. I mean, he led the SEC in yards per attempt at 10, and we also saw this in the fourth quarter against Alabama. I certainly think his upside is a little bit limited compared to some of the other quarterbacks in the SEC as far as talent, but at the same time, I mean, he delivered last year, and the skill talent that Georgia brings back at receiver with the tight ends like we talked about, it is certainly, I think, a concern. It's an area they can work on, but I think it also, to go back to what we were just talking about, who's going to push this team? That's the question in the East, is that even if Georgia regresses a little bit, which team can jump up and take that step? And it's really hard to see Kentucky, Florida, or Tennessee being able to do that because you probably need Georgia to lose twice.
Right.
Maybe they can stumble once, like you said, at South Carolina, or maybe at Kentucky. But losing twice, that seems like a lot to ask. I think maybe the best way to look at this is they have 12 games to get ready to play Alabama in the SEC championship game, and then one game to maybe fix their issues again before playing them in the national championship.
Oh, man. Yeah, but I can't sell that, Steven. I got to sell hope. You know what I mean?
We're trying to get you off of the old takes exposed.
But next on the docket here, of course, we got Kentucky. Man, expectations are just sky high in Lexington. This fan base, they think, if there is a year to knock off Georgia, we're getting them in Lexington late in the season. There's some turnover, of course, on offense. Chris Rodriguez status, I hear he's going to be suspended coming out the gate, but
Florida in week 2, that'd be interesting.
Right, if they don't have him, but not season threatening is my understanding of that situation. So I don't know. What thoughts on Kentucky? I mean, their fans hate when I say this, but the schedule lines up well, and I don't look at that as Kentucky's not worthy. I look at it like this is an opportunity here to do something you've never done and possibly punch that ticket to Atlanta. Like you said, things would have to go wrong for Georgia, and a lot would have to go right for Kentucky. But I got no problem with Kentucky fans thinking this could be their year. They finally punch that ticket.
Yeah, I think we have to start with what's been going on recently. I mean, they've won 10 games in 2 out of the last 4 years. I mean, if you go when I was, just starting watching college football, I mean, that would be almost unheard of for Kentucky. So, I mean, they sort of reached a kind of not necessarily a floor, but they've elevated the program under Mark Stoops to where we just expect them to win, 8 games a year, go to bowl games. And, the schedule does set up well for them to make a run and to be a top 25 team. And I think maybe that's another sign of kind of the respect for Kentucky. They're losing Wan'Dale Robinson. They're losing 3 great offensive linemen. And yes, they have replaced offensive linemen well. And they lost their offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen, not to mention defensive line, secondary. And yet we haven't picked in the top 25. And we think they could finish second in the SEC East. So certainly getting Georgia at home is a huge opportunity to try and make a statement in the East. I still think that this team is a few paces behind Georgia. Georgia just has too much talent. And also, again, you're asking them to lose 2 times, Georgia to lose twice, and Kentucky to fill some of these question marks that we have.
Now, how big of a concern with Kentucky is receivers? I know they've attacked the transfer portal, but not every there's only one Wan'Dale Robinson. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's gonna be tough. I know they got another Robinson,
Tavion Robinson from Virginia Tech. Yeah,
so he looked good. Dane Key, the true freshman. They got another guy out of Nashville, Brown, the true freshman. I mean, they've got guys that got promise. But again, how big of an issue is that? For again, we're not talking Kentucky trying to reach 6 games and go to bowl, because those players I'm more than confident can deliver that. We're talking 10-win season possibly. Level of concern that those players will be a hindrance to that.
It's a good question. I think the entire operation maybe is to group in receivers. I think obviously Will Levis is one of the SEC's better quarterbacks. It's an incredibly deep year for quarterbacks in the SEC, and I think you'd like to see him cut down on some of the interceptions. And Kentucky's turnover situation was really weird last year, as you and I have talked about before. And then to go 5-1, 1-score games with a negative turnover margin is almost unheard of. I am curious to see how the coordinator situation pans out. Liam Cohen was so good at they averaged about 11 more points a game with last year compared to 2020. Scangrinello comes over from the NFL. It's supposedly going to be the same system, maybe some tweaks in there. So I think there's a top-down concern of how does the new play caller, 3 new offensive line starters, and then the turnover at receiver, as you mentioned. I think Tavion Robinson will be an impact player. I do think Wan'Dale Robinson was a better player and pretty special all-around threat. So I think Robinson plus Dane Key and some of those other guys are probably going to be fine at receiver. My greater concerns are offensive line and play caller.
Now, what about the defense? I mean, I know they're losing a lot on the defensive front, but man, they have just been stacking talent. And Kentucky's a program where they don't play a lot of freshmen. So they bring a guy in, they develop him for 2-3 years, and then they hit the field. And this is going to be the most talented defensive line I think they've ever had. Doesn't mean it's going to be the best, but there's promise there. And I love the linebackers. They got a group of experience, and they got a group of younger guys coming up. Again, maybe the most talented linebacking core in school history. But I do think there's a big question in the defensive backfield. They lost Corker, who's
Vito Tisdale tore his ACL in the spring too, so
right.
they're already down one guy.
There's issues there in the secondary, and the secondary was, a little bit of a weakness last season. So, what's your level of concern given that it's great to have a great D-line and linebackers, but in today's game, when you're facing all these receivers, all these quarterbacks, like you mentioned, secondary could cost you some games.
Yeah, I mean, they've tried to bolster the secondary through the transfer portal and bringing in some guys. I think they've improved their depth there as well. I think what's kind of interesting to your point, the defensive front, it's a new defensive front, but at the same time, there's a lot of talent coming in on that group. So I think the secondary is probably my biggest concern about this defense. I also think it goes to what we were kind of talking about with Kentucky, that they've sort of just reached a floor where you just expect them to have a good defense. I mean, they've been in the top 5 in scoring defense the last couple of years, did a really nice job last year of not giving up big plays and sort of limiting the damage. You can bend but don't break, and be better in the red zone. The linebacker group is outstanding, man. It's one of the best in the SEC with Weaver and Jones and Square and some of those other guys. So love the linebackers. I think they're going to be fine up front. I think the secondary might be the biggest concern, and especially when you face Richardson, Hendon Hooker, Stetson Bennett. That's the group that'll probably determine just how far or where this team defense finishes in the SEC.
We've already hit on Kentucky, Georgia, but what do you think is going to be the tougher game going down to Gainesville early in the season or later in the season at Tennessee?
It's a great question, man. I would say probably Tennessee. I think the first game. I mean, I guess the good for Kentucky is you're catching Florida in the season. Florida does have that element of surprise, but they also play Utah in that first game, so you can't play the FCS thing of kind of hiding and you don't have to show a lot. You have to show something to beat Utah. So I think Kentucky will have a much better idea of what to expect from Florida. And because of all the new pieces at Florida and figuring things out, I think Tennessee is the second best team in the East. I don't think the gap between Tennessee and Kentucky is very wide, but going to Knoxville, giving Tennessee time to reload by the end of the year, I would say the Kentucky at Tennessee would be a little tougher.
Good answer, Stephen. I like it. You can stay.
Cousin Shane probably approves that one, doesn't he?
Next team in Athlon's magazine, Missouri. There's a lot to like about Missouri. They're a weird program because 2 years ago they overachieved, and then everyone got on the bandwagon. And then last year,
I will admit I was wrong about that one. So.
Last year, underachieved. Now everyone's, Drinkowitz, I don't know about him, even though he's recruiting at a record pace. And there's a lot to like about Missouri. I love the receivers. They're young, but they're extremely talented. If they hit on a quarterback, I think I got confidence in Drink to produce running backs. He's done it 3 years in a row. Just gets these guys that have little to no fanfare and turns them into outstanding running backs. So I got confidence in that group. But I don't know, where would you go with Missouri right now, in particular with this quarterback competition? Who do you think will be the guy there in Missouri?
I like Brady Cook. I thought he played pretty well in the bowl game against Army. Of course, how much do you read into bowl performances? It may say something about how Missouri feels about its quarterback room when they were pursuing JT Daniels and others this offseason. Right. So I think there's certainly a level of concern or maybe uncertainty about the quarterbacks. But I love the receivers, too. I mean, Luther Burden, I think, is going to have a huge year. Toski Dove, too, end up on our All-SEC team. The offensive line should be really good, too. 4 starters are back from Missouri. But I think in the big picture, to me, this team comes down to 2 things this year. It's the quarterback situation and the defense. How far does both of those need to progress? And I think in the larger sense, I know they probably underachieved relative to expectations last year. I think Drinkowitz has got, I think he's a good coach. I think they just need better players. I think that's the point. Yeah. They just need more Luther Burdens. They need more guys like that to be able to go to that next level in the East. It doesn't help that Tennessee's getting better. Kentucky's, at one of the peaks of its program, and of course Florida hiring Billy Napier. So I think Drinkowitz is going to be fine there, especially if he keeps recruiting top 15 classes.
Now they've got an interesting non-conference schedule too. Louisiana Tech, right out the gate. That's not one where, you overlook Louisiana Tech, they'll bite you in the ass. And then week 2, this is a game I really wanted to ask you about, at Kansas State, September 10th. So, how do they match up against the Wildcats?
Old Big 12 rivals getting back together.
Right.
Yeah. Kansas State is a sleeper in the Big 12 this year. If you look at the Big 12, Baylor, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State probably going to get most of the preseason favorite. Kansas State is very sneaky. They have Adrian Martinez, who's a transfer from Nebraska.
Oh, yeah.
Been kind of he's been a good runner, a little bit inconsistent with turnovers and passing at times, but Deuce Vaughn is the player to watch.
Right.
Kansas State, they've kind of a smaller running back, but all-purpose. They are very good along the line of scrimmage. Should be solid on defense this year. That is a game I think Kansas State will be favored in this offseason.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned Deuce Vaughn, I remember. LSU was playing with an arm tied behind their back, but they did whip LSU for what that's worth. So, yeah, that's an interesting game. I think I had a Mizzou question here for you. Yeah, this is interesting. So I know the defense. They were god awful to start the year, and then basically in the middle of the year. But at the end of the year, they kind of started to put it together. And according to Athlon, I love the depth charts and everything are out there. We got 11 seniors in the 2 deep on defense. Now, that can be a great thing or that can be a bad thing,
right,
depending on how good those players are. But, does that give you any confidence that maybe, with so many seniors on the 2 deep, that maybe this defense, I don't know, maybe the light clicked on at the tail when they fired their defensive line coach. Now, of course, they got Blake Baker, who I don't have a ton of respect for, but
the second year of his tenure at Miami did not go well, and some of it probably wasn't his fault. He is a younger coach who probably has learned a lot over the last couple of years because he was coordinator at Louisiana Tech and Miami. I think, to play devil's advocate for a second here, Missouri played South Carolina and Florida down the stretch. And so I think you wonder how much of that was bad offenses, struggling teams. Florida at that point of the season was kind of falling apart. How much of that improvement was to be believed or, was just that the opponents were the maybe.
But they also played Georgia. And they played them really tough.
Yeah.
They were just completely overmatched. And Arkansas, which led the SEC in rushing, they didn't completely stop them. And
Army too in the bowl game, which is
right.
Always a difficult.
These are damn teams that love to run the ball, and they did a little bit better there. So I believe they were dead last in rushing, and then the last month they were 4th in the SEC, if I'm remembering my stats correctly. So I don't know. If I'm a Mizzou fan, I think there's some optimism that maybe something has clicked there on the defense, which would be huge for them.
Yeah, and you mentioned the experience. It's not only just experience; it's guys in the transfer portal. I think it's even if they aren't impact players, you need depth, especially in the SEC when you're going up against some of these teams. Kentucky's going to have Rodriguez and some of the other backs that are in here to be able to stop the run. So I think the depth is better on this side of the ball. I think just a new approach is probably going to work because clearly what they were doing the first 6, 7, 8 games wasn't working. So if I was a Missouri fan, I'd be optimistic for improvement. You have that many guys coming back, that many seniors, plus the transfers. There should be some improvement here. Maybe not to first, second, or third in the SEC, but if you're talking about the margins where this team is probably going to be, improvement there, better quarterback play probably gets them to 6 wins, and that non-conference game at Kansas State is going to be really tricky to navigate, and you still have to go to host Arkansas and crossover play as well.
All right, next in the Athlon magazine we got South Carolina. Bingo, yeah. So, hey, there's a lot to like about Shane Beamer and everything they're doing in Columbia. This is another one. This is my favorite thing about the preseason, Stephen. I try to hint at it, but all these fan bases, they're all on cloud 9, and I love it because they should be. There's a lot to like about the improvements of these teams, and no exception. We got South Carolina fans out here thinking they can win the East, and who knows? If everything goes right, I'm not picking them to win the East, but they got Spencer Rattler now, and I think that's a huge, huge upgrade. So what's your overall thoughts on the Gamecocks after they pulled a couple upsets? They stunned the hell out of me winning the bowl game. I did not see that coming.
Especially in the fashion that it did.
Right.
They totally dominated North Carolina along the line of scrimmage. I think the positives for South Carolina is what you mentioned. At the end of the year, trending up, trending in the right direction. So I think certainly that combined with the transfer portal addition says to me that this program is headed in the right direction. I like the Spencer Rattler pickup. I think, first of all, not everything at Oklahoma was his fault last year. His yards per attempt declined. The big plays weren't there. Some of that was offensive line. Some of that was the rushing game for Oklahoma was not as good as it was. So some of those things are on him, not all of it. He's got to be the most talented quarterback South Carolina's had in a long time, right?
Maybe ever.
Yeah, and not to mention you've seen the revolving door they had. They were probably trying to check and see if you and I had some eligibility left at the end of the year. But, I think they are in a much better position offensively. And I would also say keep an eye on the receiver transfers. Wells from James Madison, Rucker from Arkansas State. That is a much deeper receiving core than they've had in the last year to go with Josh Vann, Jaheim Bell at tight end. To me, the interesting thing about South Carolina is we're going to spend all offseason talking about Spencer Rattler and all that. I still think the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball is really where this team is going to have to improve if they want to make that jump to join Tennessee and Kentucky in that middle of the SEC.
And they also got a transfer, I think his name's Reed, the defensive back, that a lot of people love that guy. I think he could be a true impact player. But let me ask you this, Stephen, a little going off the side here. What is one thing that Arkansas and Ole Miss had in common last season, aside from, exceeding expectations? A big reason why, in my opinion, do you have any idea what I'm hinting at here? And it applies to South Carolina this upcoming year.
I don't. You want to hit me with it?
According to your magazine, 15 super seniors on South Carolina's roster. Yeah. And I think we have proven in the short time that we've had these super seniors that, experience can beat talent. And you hit on, no one is looking at South Carolina's roster and saying, well, this is the best roster in the East. We can't go that far. But last year, no one was saying that against Arkansas. No one was saying that about Ole Miss. And yet experience really won out for those two. So that's just another thing that I look at South Carolina and I think maybe we got something here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Not to mention, we've talked about the transfer pickups. I think also the second year of that coaching staff. The culture of that program, especially under Shane Beamer, seems to be very strong, and they seem to have a good thing going. I think it's everything to me says South Carolina is trending in the right direction. I think they could be a better team this year, but it also might just be 6-7 wins. It might not be to 8 because of the schedule that they have to face and some of the question marks that they have. On super seniors specifically, you and I talked about this last year, and I do think teams are, more veteran teams. You're seeing it in the overall 131 of why teams are so close together and trying to sort some of these out. Like the difference between 15 and 35 is probably pretty small because rosters are older. Transfer portal additions have, made teams, it's a lot easier for teams to fill kind of gaps on their roster because of that.
Now, let me ask you one final thing about South Carolina, Stephen. Tougher game here at Kentucky, October 8th, or home for Tennessee, November 19th, second to last game of the season.
Man, the interesting thing about the game against Tennessee is they go to Florida the week before, and then they have to go to Clemson the week after. So the end of the season is not easy, especially when you have that rivalry. I'll have to stick, it's a tough one because you're going on the road to play Kentucky, but you also get Tennessee at home. Man, it's like 50-50 of that one. I would probably still say Tennessee just because I think they're the better team. But,
gotcha.
if we're trying to project how South Carolina may get to 7-8 wins, like picking off Tennessee at home is one of those games they're probably going to have to get because I think winning on the road in Lexington, not impossible, but I think you'd like to get Tennessee at home at the end of the year.
Right, and South Carolina fans, they've got Georgia and Clemson in their sights, but really, realistically, these are the teams, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee. That's got to be your focus right now, getting over that hill before you can get to the elite of the elite, which I know there was a time you owned Clemson and there was a time you go back and forth with Georgia, but, you got to climb that ladder before you can get quite that high. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I was just thinking as we're talking here, they face Clemson, Texas A&M, and Georgia, which are 3 of our top 5 in the country. So at the end of the year, South Carolina's fans and coaches should be able to tell us, where these teams stack up nationally. It is a very difficult schedule. It's also, it's life in the SEC. There really isn't an easy schedule. There's some easy crossovers some year, but when you play at Arkansas, host Texas A&M, that's probably one of the tougher crossovers in the East. So I think it gets at kind of the point I think you and I are probably getting at here, which I think South Carolina is getting better. I just don't know that they end up being 8-4, 9-3. If they do, it's probably because Spencer Rattler really hits and that offensive line improves, and same thing for their defensive front. All
right, next. Best for next to last. Tennessee. Of according to Athlon here, I mean, hell, a lot to like about Tennessee. Overshot expectations, dropped the bowl game, unfortunately, but still, I mean, with Hendon Hooker back, with Tillman back, with 4 or 5 starting offensive linemen back, this could be the best offense in the SEC with Josh Heupel and the tempo he like. We'll see how many they may set a record for fake injuries they face this year, because that's going to be the only way to slow them down. Thoughts on Tennessee? I know you already got them as the second best team projected in the East.
Yeah, I think optimism should be very high at Tennessee. We have heard that before, but I think there's
every 3 years.
Yeah, every 3 years. I think the question that I have with the offense is, I mean, Hendon Hooker was so good last year. He led the SEC in yards per attempt over in SEC-only games last year. Cedric Tillman going to be even better this year, I think. The questions for me at Tennessee, the offensive line's got to play a little bit better, and not to mention filling out those 2 and 3 receiver spots. I'm on the Jalen Hyatt breakout train once again this year for maybe like the 3rd year in a row. But you just see the impact of last year for Tennessee. I mean, they averaged 21 points a game to 39. They led the SEC in plays of 40+ after having just 3 the year before. So, I mean, to me, the optimism is definitely on offense. And I think the question is, like, what's the next step for that offense? Like, can these new pieces that are stepping in the second year, can that take Tennessee up another notch? So statistically, it may be hard to average 40-something points a game, but if they do, then you're talking, okay, we've only got them 8-4. Maybe they need to be a little bit higher if they can reach that level, plus some improvement on defense.
Now, what's a bigger question mark for the Vols for you? Offensive tackle, I believe they led, if you want to call it, or they had the most sacks allowed
44,
in the SEC, or defensive backfield, which their best player got drafted in the NFL in the 2nd round, I believe, out of the Alontae Taylor. So, and they got toasted by a lot of good SEC teams, and they got toasted in the bowl game. So
Theo Jackson also gone too for them.
Oh, of course, another draft pick. So your 2 best players gone out of the backfield. So what's the bigger question for you, the offensive tackle or defensive backfield?
It's a great question, because I think obviously you have to protect Hendon Hooker.
Right.
I think also I think Tennessee's depth along the line of scrimmage, especially on offense, needs to continue to improve. I would still pick the defense, though, just because I think when, studying Tennessee over the last couple of years, and watching some of these teams when they were at the top of the SEC, like how many difference makers do they have on defense? I mean, they had just, waves of them. And, it's like you start looking at this year with Young and Barron and Banks. Like those guys are on our all-SEC team. And I think somebody will emerge out of the secondary. But at the same time, like Tennessee needs more guys. They need more difference makers on that side of the ball, and that will help them close the gap to Georgia and some of these other teams in there. So I think based upon the fact that Tennessee struggled so much in the SEC on defense, in SEC games, giving up 200 rushing yards, over 30 points a game, I'd be worried more about the defense right now.
Now, one measuring stick game, not right out the gate, week 2 at Pitt. They lost to Pitt last season. What can you tell us about Pitt? I know there's a lot of transition, but how do they match up against the Vols this year?
A little bit different Pitt team this year. They lost Kenny Pickett to the NFL. Jordan Addison, the standout receiver, transferred to USC. The strengths of Pittsburgh, 5 offensive line starters back, should be one of the better groups in the ACC. The defense is very good, too, strong on the defensive front. And at quarterback, it could be Keaton Slovis, the USC transfer. So the cupboard isn't bare at Pitt. I know they lost a lot in Pickett and Addison. I still think they're very good. So I'm picking Tennessee to win that game, but I would say it's not going to be an easy game still, because Pitt is still very good along the line of scrimmage, and defensively they can cause some problems for Tennessee.
Is that just a team it's kind of hard to predict what they are? Because I've had a guy on recently, a Vegas insider. He said even though the line favors Tennessee, he's betting Pitt. And then I've had Dave Bartu on the line. He says Pitt's the most overrated team in the country. So it's like, I don't know who to believe on this one.
Yeah, I think it goes kind of at the environment of college football right now, which is the transfers. Like, I mean, you watch Keaton Slovis at USC. He was great as a freshman. He was inconsistent after. And, the 2020 season was so weird and scrambled some of our statistics and some of these things that I don't really know, what to believe on some of these, things.
Right.
Like, so I think we have him in the top 25. Our magazine went to press before Jordan Addison officially decided to leave Pitt. We may have lowered Pitt a few spots. I still think they're somewhere 8-4, 9-3 type of team this year.
So it's just safe to say this is not going to be a layup for Tennessee.
Right. That's the point I was getting at. Yeah, I think if I had to pick right now and you asked me, I would take Tennessee. But I do think that that's still a very dangerous game for Tennessee, even though that Pitt's losing the first-round quarterback in Jordan Addison.
Now, what do you think will be the tougher game for the Vols? Florida at home, which is beating them like 19 out of 20, unfortunately, or the very next week at LSU, because these are swing games right here, Stephen. Death Valley, it's going to be tough. They're going to have 2 weeks to prepare for it, though. What's your thoughts on that?
I would go at LSU. I think LSU is one of those teams that's going to get better from week 1 to week 12 because of the coaching staff and some of the talent they still have in the program. Not to mention, I think if you're Tennessee and you're looking at that schedule and you go, we got to beat Florida in the East, we get them at home, but everything sets up, and then, you got to go on the next week on the road to go to Death Valley and play LSU, and then, of course, Alabama's coming up right after that. So a very difficult stretch of games, but I would say at LSU would be my pick.
Okay. All right, then last but not least here, we got Vanderbilt in the Athlon magazine here. Clearly, it's been a rough go of it, but what's your thoughts on Clark Lee? I mean, I was stunned when they dropped the opener against ETSU. I mean, it looked like this guy might be in over his head. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. But I honestly thought Vanderbilt got a lot tougher as the season progressed. They won some close games. Thank God they got the Alabama kicker transfer because he won 2 games for them.
They have good special teams this year. They got a punter from Florida Atlantic who's good. So
hey, there you go. And they nearly knocked off South Carolina. So, there's reason for some optimism. Do you think this is going to continue to go in the right direction year 2 under Clark Lee?
I think the biggest thing we should take away from Vanderbilt is when we listened to Clark Lee last offseason, he was talking about was it a 10-year plan for the program. This is not an overnight turnaround at all. Right. And I think it's not to use brick by brick here or anything to bring up any bad memories for you, Mike. But I think it's about finding pieces for the future, 2023 and 2024. They have 2 interesting quarterbacks in Mike Wright and Ken Seals. They have some skill talent, too. McGowan, the freshman, is really interesting to go with Davis at running back. I think line of scrimmage is a concern for Vanderbilt. Like just talent, just depth, got to be better there. I think the biggest reason for optimism is it's the second year under this coaching staff. And I think, as you said, they were getting better at times last year. Can they build on it this year? And I think the second year of the staff with another year to recruit, they've brought in a good class. Like you could see some improvement. So we do not have them winning a game in SEC play. They have a tricky non-conference schedule when you go to Northern Illinois, who's our projected MAC champion, and you go to Hawaii in the first game of the year. But I think if they can be more competitive in the SEC, even if they don't win a game, I think that's still a good sign for the future for Vanderbilt.
And do you think this defense will just, obviously have a bigger Clark Lee imprint on it in year 2? And I know, they made strides there, but pass rush was just a huge issue. Do you think they can manufacture some of that more this in year 2?
Yeah, I think they can. I think overall the defense should be better. Now, better might be just giving up 30 points a game as opposed to close to 40 in SEC play.
Right.
But that would be a good sign because then all of a sudden, Vanderbilt's a little bit closer to the pack in the SEC, and you start looking at a guy like Kane Patterson who transferred in from Clemson should be someone who can help out a lot. But I think the broader point, and I think you were kind of hinting at it there, is stopping the run, pass rushers. Those are things you can only just recruit your way out of, and it just may take Vanderbilt some time to get those kind of talent and bodies that they need. So I would expect general improvement out of this Vanderbilt defense, but maybe not marked improvement this year.
And I mentioned the opening season loss to ETSU last year. This year, you mentioned at Hawaii right out the gate, but as I understand it, Hawaii is a train wreck this offseason. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on Vanderbilt? I know it's a long trip, but do you expect them to win if they play up to their standard?
Yeah, I do. You probably remember Timmy Chang. He was very, he was a great player to have on NCAA football back in the day. He's now the head coach, former record-setting quarterback. I think if this is played at Vanderbilt, I don't think we're even worried about any kind of weird stuff happening. But Hawaii plays on campus now. It's a smaller stadium. It's a long trip out there, the first game of the season. You don't really know what Hawaii is because they have so many new faces. They were an absolute mess under Todd Graham, but it's a new staff. They've got some transfers coming in. They've got some turnover. They're just a hard team to get a read on. But if Vanderbilt plays, I think, like they did last year in some of those games, South Carolina, maybe some of those others, they should be fine.
So let's break down where Athlon's got the East here. Wanted to ask you a question or two off that, but of course, I mean, you noted it already. Georgia number one in the East, undefeated in conference play. I mean, is there anything you could see tripping them up?
I don't think so. I think they're a clear number one in the East, and I think the question is what's the gap between Georgia and Alabama? It's not very big, but as we were talking about, they have basically 12 games to get ready for showdown number one, part three between these two teams over the last 2 years. So if there's any concern about Georgia, now I guess you could maybe go, well, the defense maybe just isn't as good as we think, but I don't know, man. But some of those guys like Jalen Carter stepping in, they're going to be just fine on that side of the ball.
Now, basically 2, 3, and 4. I mean, pick any order. We got Tennessee number 2, Kentucky number 3, Florida number 4, but all projected to have a 4-4 conference record. So, safe to assume I could talk you into Florida being 2 and Tennessee being 4, or Kentucky being 4 or Kentucky being 2. I mean, we could put these in any order, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this gets at what we were talking about just a little bit ago, is when I was doing the 131, you get to a point in there where it's 15 through 35 or 40 or pretty much the same. You change one win or two here or there, and all of a sudden somebody who was 27th is now closer to 15. It feels like that's where it's going to be very volatile in college football. There's going to be a lot of great games out of that mix. But I think any of those teams 2 through 4 could finish second, and any of those could finish fourth. I don't think they're separated by much as we have in our projected records. They should all be 5-3, 4-4 types.
And then right there, you got South Carolina, number 5, with a 3-5 conference record. Is the gap very wide between them and Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee?
I think there's a little bit of separation. I don't think a ton. I think much of what South Carolina is to join that group, if Spencer Rattler is as good as potentially we think, then maybe there is a fourth team in that mix. South Carolina's gotten some top 25, top 30 consideration by some this offseason. We've got them in the top 50. So I don't think there's a ton of separation. But I think if you had to tier them off, Georgia in a tier of its own, then the next 3, and then South Carolina.
And how far off is Missouri from the pack? You got number 6 and 2-6 in conference play.
I think they're a pace or two behind South Carolina. I still think South Carolina is in a much better position at the much better quarterback. They're in a much better spot with Spencer Rattler transferring in, and the uncertainty from Missouri. I think also South Carolina's defense in a little bit better spot too. So I think South Carolina slightly ahead of Missouri in terms of just team strength this year.
And then, of course, so then Vanderbilt 7. And now I would assume, I was going to ask you, Stephen, which of these predictions you're most confident in. I got to assume it's Georgia 1 and Vanderbilt 7. So that naturally leads to which one of these are you least confident that where Athlon's got these teams projected that a team will finish?
I would say somewhere in the 2 through 4 order. Like if you told me Kentucky finished second, I wouldn't be surprised. We debated Kentucky and Tennessee quite a bit. I think we have Missouri at 5 and 7. Wouldn't surprise me if they found a way to get to 6 and 6. Vanderbilt, we do not have winning an SEC game. If you play the odds, they'll probably win one, just because it's really hard to keep.
Right.
At some point you'll probably break through. So I think if we're going to be wrong about this, I think it is that 2 through 4 range.
Now you got next to that, you got games to watch. I don't want to break down all these or anything, but is there one or two that I'm thinking specifically SEC East matchups that you think will be the game of the year in the East, or maybe just personally ones you're most looking forward to, a game or two that stands out to you that you're like, I cannot wait for this Saturday to sit down and
all
watch
of
these.
them. Yeah, I think let's start with the 2 through 4 trio. Just seeing what happens when Kentucky goes to Tennessee. That game was so crazy last year, and these teams were so close in our top 25 this year that matchup is one I want to see, because if we're going to be wrong, it's probably going to be as a result of that one. So I think it's the crossover between Florida, Kentucky, and Tennessee, just seeing those matchups because of how competitive they could be in the I think college football fan to me, just the Jacksonville experience with Florida and Georgia has just been so dominant last year, and giving Billy Napier half of a season. Like, is Anthony Richardson by that point ready to take off? And so I think that just the rivalry and the history of Florida and Georgia, and just seeing where Florida is compared to Georgia at that point of the year will be exciting.
And just speaking to that, Hey, things do line up for Kentucky, but it is tricky because they got at Tennessee, at Florida. So, man, you're going to have to overcome. It's good to have a senior quarterback that a lot of people love because without Will Levis, I don't think Kentucky stands a chance in those games.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think having a quarterback like him is so crucial to Kentucky because as you remember, how many times, has Kentucky under Eddie Gran in previous years just struggled so much
Right.
in the passing game, and last year hiring Liam Cohen, bringing in Will Levis, and now the passing game and whole operation jumps forward. So, when you look at those three teams, Tennessee's got Hendon Hooker, Florida's got Anthony Richardson. Like, all these quarterbacks have high upside. And I think that also adds to the intrigue if you add in Spencer Rattler for South Carolina. It's very deep in the SEC at quarterback this year. And I think it's going to make for an exciting race.
All right, so just want to say thanks once again to Stephen for joining the show. And, of course, if you missed that little segment there at the beginning, we're going to get the other 7 teams in the SEC on the next episode, do a little West recap tomorrow. But, man, I think Stephen knocked it out of the park. This was one of the best interviews we've ever done, maybe the best one. And, this guy truly is an encyclopedia of college football knowledge. And just, he came totally prepared. I didn't ask him any of these questions before we sat down. No notes required. He's just spitting out all this incredible knowledge at us. So just very grateful for Stephen. Give that man a follow at Athlon Stephen and check out his YouTube page. Again, you can find links to all that in the show notes, as well as a link to purchase the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine. If you don't have one yet, it's my go-to college football magazine. So get on out there, help Stephen out by getting you an Athlon preview via the Athlon store or wherever you get your magazines today. But that's going to do it for this episode of the show. We'll catch you on the next one.